Who invented the microprocessor? When computers changed from using these big, bulky, fragile vacuum tubes to miniature transistors, it was a matter of time before someone will figure out how to put the entire brain of a computer in a single chip. And when it finally happened, it sparked a series of events that nearly set history in a completely different direction to what we know today. It's the end of the 60s, and Fairchild, an American chip company, is making the best out of the transistor revolution. One of their best employees, Italian engineer Federico Faggin, and probably the hero of today's story, had recently led the team that figured out a method to make transistor gates out of silicon, rather than aluminum, which made for faster, smaller, and more power-efficient integrated circuits. A method that will end up becoming so important that it will give a name to an entire region and an industry decades later. But at the moment, the discovery did not particularly impress his superiors, given that it would require massive changes to the way they do things, and so they were slow to adopt the technology. But some were ready to capitalize on Fairchild's mistake, and a group of engineers had left to form a scrappy startup called Intel. You might have heard of them. Faggin was sure they intended to take silicon technology to the next level. After fighting with his company for years, he resolved to go where he believed the future was and asked Intel for a job. For Intel, the call of this experienced designer could not have come at a better time. A Japanese calculator company called Busicom had signed a contract for them to design a high-performance desktop calculator that used only 7 chips. But Intel, believing miniaturization technology had finally reached maturity, promised to push all the functionality of 4 of those chips into a single one. But promises are easy, and chip design is hard. And the first day Faggin arrives at Intel, he's handed the calculator project that is massively behind schedule, and with a representative from Busicom arriving from Japan the very next day. Masatoshi Shima, the engineer from Busicom, was terribly unimpressed at the utter lack of progress. He could hardly contain his anger at Faggin and having traveled halfway through the world only for there to be nothing for him to check. His anger irritated Faggin, who had only been 2 days at Intel so far, and had no interest in being beaten over an error that was not his fault. Okay, look Mr. Shima, you can continue to bitch or you can help me. I don't like this situation any more than you do, but if we're going to salvage this, I'm gonna need you to act more and stop complaining. I did not make Faggin curse for no reason, like this is a direct quote from the interview I use as a source. Coming from a Japanese culture, Shima was shocked that someone who is supposed to be the client would be treated this way, but I guess he had never met Italians. But he did agree to stay and help Intel design the chips his company had requested, and to Faggin's surprise, the man was very good at logic design. After only an introduction on the basic method, he completed the entire logic design of the miracle chip by himself. The result was the Intel 4004, the world's first microprocessor, the first computer brain in a chip. And with Faggin signing it at the circuit level, no one will be able to deny him credit this time. For once, he was finally sure his contributions would be appreciated, and that he was at the cusp of the wave of the future. Surely Intel will recognize the monumental significance of this invention, right? 1974. Years had passed since the introduction of the 4004, but Faggin was not happy. His team had introduced several new, improved microprocessors since, but every single time it had required months of convincing for the big brass at Intel to authorize their projects. In the minds of the Intel board, theirs was not a processor company but a general semiconductor company, and products like a microprocessor were only useful in the sense that they could be used to get clients to also buy more memories and other chips. Faggin felt caged in, boxed, frustrated. After he had helped usher silicon transistors and integrated circuits, he was sure microprocessors were the next big thing, and he could not understand why anyone in Intel could not see that. And he suspected he was not the only one to think that. Hey Rolf, can we go for a drink? You see what they're doing, how they keep ignoring and delaying us. If we keep this up, Intel will be left in the dust. In fact, I think it already started. I'm leaving Intel. I would like to start a company to build microprocessors. Wait, you're leaving to form your own company? In the middle of a recession when they just laid off 10% of the workforce? Yes. Okay, so what's the product? Microprocessors. I will make it up as I go. Ralph Ungerman was chief of microprocessor development, working directly under Faggin on Intel processors. A networking and computer expert, he may be better than anybody, might understand the colossal mistake Intel was making, and will be just crazy enough to do something about it. Screw it, let's go. And just like that, in an enormous leap of faith, they were on business. As the two men continued drinking, they tried coming up for a name on their new business. But the next day, when they tried remembering any name, they would just draw a blank. Clearly, if the name of their company could not survive a night of drinking, it was not good enough. So every night, they will drink and brainstorm and hope something will stick. And then, one day, I kind of like iLog, you know, like the term integrated logic. It has a nice feeling to it. I got it! Zilog!
One hangover later.
We really need to take it easy with the drinking. This is maybe not the most constructive way to come up with a company. At least you had that Zilog name idea. That was really cool. Zilog! Halloween 1974. Finally, they were ready to leave to create their own company, but not before they will accidentally recruit one other major collaborator. At Intel's Halloween party, Faggin finally announces to his team that he was leaving to form a new company. Wait, Federico, can I come with you guys? Shima, the same Japanese engineer Faggin had fought with on his second day of Intel. He had stayed at Intel to work after seeing the promise of microprocessors, and after having proven his skills, he would be the perfect missing piece for the new company. Once they had the money to actually pay him, that is, because if there's one thing that could ruin this dream, was a severe lack of capital. In order to fully understand a lot of the decisions Zilog took, you have to understand how bonkers an idea it was to go and form a new company at this time. In 1973, just a year before these three men left Intel, many countries in the world were experiencing a severe economic crisis, and among developed countries, the United States was having a particularly bad time. High levels of debt after a prolonged and costly war, and some controversial changes in the backing of the US currency were generating a shock that the stock market was seriously feeling. Combine this with an oil embargo that tripled the price of oil, then yeah, finding investment capital for the still small tech industry was not an easy feat. Side note, this oil embargo economic crisis is the very same that destroyed Nintendo's projects and silently pushed them towards video games in a previous video. Small world. But back in the US, the news that these legends had formed a new company caught the attention of the only type of company that will still have money during an oil shortage. Exxon Enterprises, the oil company. Yep, that ExxonMobil. It was not clear at the time what Exxon will be so keen to invest in a microprocessor company, but with the economic crisis being what it was, Zilog had no choice if it wanted a chance at the market. Exxon's investments was not enough to fulfill Zilog's full desires. For starters, it was not enough money to build a microprocessor factory, but it gave them a start, and it was now up to them to figure out how to design a microprocessor better than anything Intel could come up with in half the time and with a design general enough that others could fabricate it. Time was short, and the feeling that Intel could wise up to their mistakes and come up with a better microprocessor hung over their heads. The three men worked with no rest for months. Faggin, who was supposed to be the CEO, ended up working on layouts, Shima focused on logic design and circuit design, and Ungerman, among many other things, led the process of creating tools so clients could check their designs based on their microcontroller. While building the simulator, he discovered a critical bug with the microcontroller layout. Shima! We need to stop, there's a bug in the processor. Oh, no problem, we just have to add a contact in the circuit and it should work again. Did you just run the entire design in your head and fix it? Masatoshi Shima, microprocessor design Chad. At the end, the design he came up with was a combination of the best aspects of other microprocessors, while also being compatible with the base instructions of the Intel 8080, Faggin's favorite processor at the time, but extending it and simplifying it, so the 3 different voltages that Intel required in Zilog would be just one, meaning that it could easily be sold to engineers that were familiar with the 8080, but still be a much superior option. A year and a month after they started the project, Zilog had completed its first product, the Zilog C80, the microprocessor that they wish they could have made on Intel. And finally, the first ad for the product was run, straight up comparing it with Intel processors at the time and showing that this small company was ready to fight fire with fire. But if they were going to reach any market presence early, their biggest enemy was not Intel, but rather a set of companies on the other side of the world that had a nasty habit of killing young companies before they even started. But Zilog had a secret plan. While in other videos I have talked a fair bit about the Japanese semiconductor revolution and how they will come to dominate entire segments of the industry, for companies in the United States, chip makers in Japan had a reputation for cloning their best chips to make illicit copies using copyright tricks to escape legal action. In fact, barely a few episodes ago, I made a whole video about how Nintendo's first console might have been made out of one of these clones. Now, when Zilog hits the market, one of their very first clients was NEC, one of those Japanese companies with such a reputation. And of course, they were all pretty sure that NEC was buying their products specifically to clone them. If NEC could clone the C80 and start selling it for cheaper, it might be game over for the young company. Thankfully, Zilog had a plan. In a move that was uncommon at the time, Shima had hidden a series of traps in the design purely for the purpose of frustrating any attempts at cloning. To this day, no one outside the original team knows exactly where all the traps are, but efforts from people such as Sergei Skorobogatov from the University of Cambridge has uncovered at least 5 of these reported 9 traps. The fabrication method for this processor made it possible to add transistors that seemed to be part of the circuit, but were actually connected to ground in the main circuit. This was nearly impossible to notice for someone examining a finished chip, and their effects went from obvious to increasingly subtle. These traps worked and bought Zilog between 9 months and a year of time in the market, and while they faced fierce competition from bigger companies such as Intel and Motorola, the simplicity and cost of their chip made it a favorite for a lot of commercial products, such as the ColecoVision console, the extremely successful early Sinclair computers, and it became the brain for tons of arcade cabinets, including pretty much every Japanese hit during its golden era. Now, to be fair, Japanese companies and a couple of American companies would eventually figure out all the traps and start selling clones, such as the NEC 78K or the Sharp LR35902, which was used to power a very familiar and very popular gaming handheld. But clones took their time, and the legit sales of the C80 were promising a bright future. But given this level of success, how does the computer market decades later belong in large parts to Intel? And Zilog is a name only relegated to retrospectives. Did any new competitors arise and kill them? Did Intel miraculously catch up? Well, as it often happens, the worst enemies are the ones hidden in plain sight. Unknown to everyone at Zilog, since the start Exxon had a secret reason to invest in the small company. You see, while home computers were a rising market, the big boy business computer industry was dominated by one company, IBM, International Business Machines, Big Blue. And no one had come close to matching their reputation for business use. However, Exxon wanted to gear up to take the business market right from their hands. Silently, they had been acquiring word processor companies, fax companies, electronic typewriter companies, and of course, Zilog, to make chips to power it all. Their plan was, once Zilog was proven in the market, to acquire the whole company and make it part of their empire. In the minds of the original founders, this discovery was deeply concerning. Zilog had been founded on the idea of using their talents to lead the microprocessor revolution away from the red tape and bad priorities of Intel, and no one was eager to now have to please a new overlord. As the 70s reached its end, Faggin will spend almost as much time fighting to keep Exxon at bay as he will spend working with clients, and his lack of business experience was quickly catching up with them. The company had not managed to scale its success and was trying too many new projects. Before long, experienced engineers were lacking at every level of the company. Faggin was a brilliant engineer, but an inexperienced CEO, and with no one to guide him, he quickly lost control of the company. And as things got rough, tensions flared. Ungerman believed he would be a better leader for the company during these trying times, and Faggin was too tired and too immature to defuse the situation. A strong rift was forming with different people taking sides, and Exxon pitting them against each other in a bid to gain control of the company. Ungerman left the company in 1978, and Faggin was too tired from this fight to hold on for long. After a scary surgical intervention for a stress-induced perforated ulcer in 1976, he finally decided to step down and have Exxon buy the company in 1980. Around this time, IBM, seeing the success of computers like the Commodore, Apple, or Spectrum, finally intended to enter the home computer market with what they call the IBM Personal Computer, a project that needed a microprocessor. This would have been a great opportunity for Zilog, but here's where being bought by Exxon completely screwed them. Because of the Exxon takeover, IBM was essentially prohibited from even considering any Zilog technology. But who was ready to make good of this opportunity? But Intel. Even if they had what was arguably the inferior product, they were available to work with IBM with their new 16-bit 8086 processor. The IBM PC ecosystem would go on to be so extraordinarily successful that it would basically become the de facto format for all home computers, and Intel made so much money from that it finally realized their mistake and slowly refocused their entire business around processors, crafting an architecture based on that one successful processors, now shortened to x86, that will come to be the standard for all personal computers for many years to come. A standard that to this day, few can challenge. And Zilog mostly became a memory of a time when the small company was almost the best in the business. But what happened to Faggin after he quit Zilog? What was he to do with his life? Well, it's the start of the 80s and the home computer industry is going through a revolution. The introduction of the Macintosh by Apple had brought to the general public the graphical interface, and quickly thereafter Microsoft had released Windows for the IBM PC ecosystem. A new era of computers was dawning, and as quickly the technology starts heading towards the dream of portable computers, one man looks from the sidelines. It's Federico Faggin. He had quit Zilog, and for a moment, he considered quitting the tech industry. But as Faggin returns from an attempt at a vacation in Italy with his family, he immediately felt something that should be familiar to many creatives. He wanted back into the fight, and he will get his chance. One of the unexpected side effects of the Apple and Microsoft war over the graphical interface was the creation of a huge aftermarket industry for a newfangled input device known as the mouse. Of all the companies fighting for market share of the mice market, one name will rise as one of the early winners, a company called Logitech. Now, according to Silicon, Federico Faggin's autobiography, sometime after the whole Zilog debacle, Faggin found himself on the board of Logitech. But critically, the book did not mention how that happened, so I decided to go find another source.
Oh, well, they asked me.
Simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, I met, there were three founders, two Italian and one Swiss. And so we had met, socially. And so we got to know each other. They asked me to go into their board to help them out. And so I went and helped out.
As the computer wars were clearly moving to the field of portable laptops, Logitech responded by starting work on the trackball, an awkward device that could be used as a mouse in portable computers. These devices were problematic. They required periodic cleaning and added a lot of bulk to laptops, so a better solution was needed. And Faggin had just the thing for this problem thanks to another company he was leading at the time, Synaptics, a combination of Synapse and Electronics, a company he co-founded with the idea of bringing forward chips capable of neural networks. Neural networks are everywhere in our current day and age, and at least a couple of them were probably responsible for you seeing this video, but at the time this was an idea decades ahead of the technological curve, and he was a believer that these analog chips would make for a superior solution to any problem that required pattern recognition. And this, surprisingly, might have been the perfect technology for the laptop pointer problem. Over the course of many brainstorming sessions, the Synaptics team came up with two solutions that use analog pattern recognition chips, a touch-sensitive screen and the touchpad. It was this last group invention that seemed like the perfect solution to their problem. A completely flat device that could efficiently emulate a mouse using a finger. confident, Faggin presented this invention to Logitech, and a partnership was born that could change the world. But this did not went according to plan. So once Synaptics invented the touchpad and offered this to Logitech, something happened with the negotiations that ended up with you leaving the board of Logitech. So what happened? How did that break?
Basically, we made a deal. The price that should be paid, and so on. And then after we proved that the whole thing worked, they wanted to renegotiate the deal and make a deal so unattractive for us that it didn't make any sense. And so I say, guys, sorry about it. I'm not going to go for this, and I cannot stay in the board. So I left the board because I said I might do this thing, with the company. So I now become competitor. So I cannot be in the board.
And you believed in the technology of the touchpad so much that you were willing to be like, okay, let's go all in on this. I'm gonna quit the board.
Yeah, I mean, it was a difficult decision, frankly, because also there were technical issues that I wasn't sure that we were up to. The head of engineering at that time, Tim Allen, was the one that reassured me, we can do it. But it was a very difficult project because he kept on having problems for about a year and a half. But the team that we had was so good that they could fix them one at a time without a hitch.
Given that the touchpad was one of the very few products Synaptics could bring to the market soon, they were essentially betting the whole company on its success. And that success might depend on hitting the market as soon as possible. It was an all-hands-on-deck situation as they fought the clock to perfect the technology in time. But as the light at the end of the tunnel was starting to be visible, with the first production samples of the touchpads just a few months away, something extremely demoralizing happened. May 1994, Apple reveals the PowerBook 500 series, the first laptop to include a touchpad. How is it possible that Apple had beaten them to the punch? As Faggin teams disassembles a $5,000 PowerBook that they had bought as soon as it was released, they discover how they did it, and that they still had a chance. Over the years, they had heard rumblings of a company in Utah called Circa that had also been working on a similar touchpad. It seems this is what Apple had licensed to develop a very expensive solution that used 3 custom analog chips and a microcontroller, versus the 1 analog chip and the 1 microcontroller that the Synaptics prototype used. More importantly, just like the introduction of the Macintosh had led to Windows, and that had created a huge aftermarket for mice, Faggin and his team understood that in the rush to copy Apple, there would be a huge demand for cheaper touchpads for every Windows laptop maker. With Synaptics having the cheaper and superior technology, victory was at hand. But in their excitement, they had almost lost sight of an old friend, now turned rival, Logitech. After Faggin had left their board, the company had decided to continue moving forward with the touchpad themselves, and in a cruel twist of fate, they had reached an agreement with Zilog. If that sounds familiar, that is because it is the very same company Faggin had founded, the one whose whole story I share in a past video. What an ironic betrayal! And together, Zilog and Logitech were making a touchpad that worked on 1 chip that included everything and was much cheaper to produce. Synaptics was about to face their biggest threat yet. Logitech was a bigger, more recognized brand with deep pockets that could afford to do one of the classic competition playbooks, sell their products at minimal profits and tank the losses to starve Synaptics out of the market. Nervous, the team at Synaptics disassembled the Logitech touchpad in search of any issues, any problems that could give them any edge in this impossible fight. And just like with Apple, lucky for them, Logitech had made one critical mistake. In their eagerness to create the cheapest SoC possible, they had developed a solution that stored the device firmware in a read-only memory that was flashed as it was manufactured, meaning that it was impossible to update the chip once it left the factory. Synaptics was also in the process of creating their own one-chip solution, but one that used OTP, one-time programmable memory. And this could be flashed once, anytime after it had been manufactured.
And so by having one-time programmable, we could quickly respond to a problem. Okay, and that's where Logitech fell in his face. They did not understand how complex the problem was. They thought it was like a mouse. For them the mouse was wow. But man, the touchpad was 100 times more difficult than a mouse. Because the signals that you have is full of noise, and you had to shift frequencies. It's amazing what we had to do to make it work.
It's very easy to judge things looking from the present to the past, but looking at it, it's like, why didn't it use OTP as well? Like that seems like a very obvious mistake. But as you
because
said,
it costs more.
Yeah, and they
basically, OTP was probably twice the cost for the microcontroller when they went to the single chip.
But this solution Synaptics was developing was still a year away from being fully finished, and in that time, Logitech could take over the market with their superior pricing. Besides, computer makers will not care about these details about writable memory, they only care about costs. The only way they will ever change their mind was if Logitech made a firmware error that caused them significant losses. But Faggin was sure this was not a matter of if, but when. You can always count on human error to eventually pass every revision unnoticed. And now, it was a matter of time of waiting and hoping that Logitech made a mistake before they ran out of money. Summer of 1998. A product supervision at a computer manufacturer in Taiwan begins the final checking process before starting production of their newest laptops. They had just received the final missing piece, a shipment of their touchpad directly from Logitech. But as engineers connect the touchpad to the laptop, nothing happens. They check the connections and the power, nothing. Maybe this was a bad sample, so they try another one, nothing. After a nerve-wracking debugging process, they figure the firmware of the touchpad has a small bug. Immediately, they call on Logitech and request an immediate replacement.
So how long is this gonna take?
A couple of months at least.
I'm sorry, did you say months? A couple of months?
Yes, months. We flashed the firmware at the factory, so we basically have to do an entire new production run. Panic starts settling in. A couple of months means delaying the whole product launch due to one faulty component. This was a disaster.
Get me Synaptics on the line, immediately!
As news of this blunder reaches Synaptics, Faggin knew the time had come for them to make their move. We can deliver the touchpad sample that will work in 1 week. Thanks to the ability to rapidly flash firmware on the chips they already had, Synaptics was able to rescue the panic OEM from Logitech's error. And with most laptops being manufactured by a relatively small number of Taiwanese companies, word starts spreading fast. Almost immediately, OEMs start fleeing their Logitech contracts in panic, suddenly very aware that the smallest firmware bug could hold their production back for months. And this was the perfect opportunity for Synaptics to take back the crown. And their one-chip solution was ready.
But with the new chip, we just roll them out. We were making lots of money at $6.
By relying on Zilog to develop their chip, Logitech had added a middleman that was adding their own profit to the mix, but Synaptics could do everything themselves.
We also designed our own microcontroller with OTP. So we did the whole thing. And we were half the chip size of Logitech. So no way they could compete with us. No way. Our cost of the chip was 1/4 there because they were not making we were making the chips, you see. They were buying from Zilog that was making the chips.
Now I see why you praise the teams of Synaptics so much, because it was a small company and yet tackling such a technically complicated problem as a touchpad and also developing their own microprocessor all at the same time.
That's right. And we not only survived but thrived. We ended up with 80% market share of the world. 80% market share of the world.
In fact, if you own a Windows laptop and you check the drivers for your touchpad, chances are you're going to see a Synaptics name all over it. Federico Faggin will remain CEO of the company before moving to chairman of the board in 1999, a position he will hold until he retired in 2007. This time, the company he left behind will continue to flourish into many other adventures. In fact, some of you might have caught that early in this video I said that Synaptics came up with two solutions for input. One was the touchpad and the other was the touchscreen, so what happened to that other one? Well, that is an entirely different story involving Apple, the iPod, the secret project that will become the iPhone, and a set of failed negotiations with Apple, which set this month's episode of SideQuest, my sideshow exploring tangential topics to the main videos. And this time I asked Mr. Faggin to tell me everything he could about it, and he even unearthed some small details that I have never seen documented anywhere.
I was the one saying, let's make it a real one,
Why is this not in the book? In fact, in SideQuest, you will also find a video on Psylocke's attempt at a 16-bit microprocessor and how it failed due to some unexpected consequences of industry politics, or my full hour-long uncut interview with Faggin on a range of topics, much more extensive than I expected.
I was trying to understand, can I make a conscious computer? Just, I couldn't figure it out. And of course, my problem in those days was a consciousness problem, right? I was feeling unhappy.
And SideQuest lives exclusively in Nebula, a creator-owned streaming service, which is the secret weapon that allows me to do all this content. You can sign up directly, or you can use the link in the description to sign up to another streaming service called CuriosityStream for professional documentaries and non-fiction content. They have a bundle, so if you sign up with them via the link, you get Nebula for free, and a special discount on annual plans, which means you end up paying a bit over $1 a month, and you immediately get access to all the stuff in Nebula. Like seriously, there's no way we could make this any cheaper.